Welcome to the Member Engagement Show, the podcast for association and member-based organization professionals. I'm your host, Kelly Whelan from Higher Logic. If you're looking to grow membership, boost retention, increase non-dues revenue, and get members more engaged, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the show to keep up with the latest episodes and visit higherlogic.com/engagement show to access past episodes and resources. Now, let's meet today's guest. On this episode, I'm joined by Stephanie Kusibab, CEO and Chief Strategist for Assentium. Stephanie has worked extensively with associations and nonprofits as a strategist, facilitator, and consultant, helping organizations uncover transformational opportunities through both research, strategic planning, and stakeholder engagement. In today's conversation, we're going to dive into some of the untapped potential of online communities for uncovering insights, identifying opportunities, and making smarter strategic decisions with your organization. Welcome to the show, Stephanie. To start us off, can you tell listeners a little about your background and the work you do?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here today with you and your listeners. My work is pretty varied over the course of my career, but I'll kind of key in on what we're doing now. And what I'm doing now is really focused on strategy and teams. Oftentimes we talk about strategy, we're creating a new initiative or we're moving in a new direction, but we sometimes forget that it's the people who get us there. And so really combining those two ideas of where are we headed, but also how do we enable the individuals to be able to help us move in that direction. And a big part of that throughout my career has been listening, being a good listener, asking really good questions, doing research, conducting focus groups, conducting user groups and asking users for their experiences and those kinds of things, which is oftentimes what's happening in your communities. So I feel like the work that I've done throughout my career is really connected to what we're talking about today. So I'm super excited to share some insights about research and mining data and those kinds of things.
I feel like in doing a lot of that, I'm sure that you've dealt with a lot of different types of data to see how you want to approach things. So that's part of why I was excited to talk to you today. We know associations collect a lot of data, but I also know from experience that many struggle to turn that information into meaningful action. So from your perspective, what would you say is the difference between simply gathering data, maybe for just data's sake, and actually uncovering and using insights from that data?
Let me start with an example. Something to define the difference between data and insights. Think of data as the numbers. Our membership comprises 30% of early career professionals, let's say, less than 30 years old. So that's a data point. But the information or the insights around that are, what does that mean? How do they behave differently? How do they behave the same? Do they check their email once a week? And then therefore we need to make a change in the way that we communicate them. Those are the kinds of things that are insights that actually drive actions, as opposed to just having information. And I think it's really interesting because in the work that I do, I see a lot of associations who get hung up in their member surveys on collecting data, all kinds of demographic data. And they very seldom connect that demographic data to the actual insights, to what does it mean? How do we use it? How does one group compare to another group? And that's really where the magic happens in the information that you have about your members.
It reminds me how I remember having Kristen Berry on the show from ASAE, and we were talking about sometimes the most interesting data points are when they make you say, like, what does that mean? You can pull the data and you can look at it, and sometimes it's helpful to compare it and see if there's trends or something. Like if you saw suddenly, okay, we had 30% of our members were young professionals, now it's 35%, then you might say, okay, more new people entering the field, does that mean we need to shift our education? But what I just did there, that follow-up question, oh, if more people are more younger professionals are joining the field, does that mean we need to do this? Does that mean we need to do this? It's those like follow-up questions and the curiosity that the data sparks that I think is one of the helpful things about looking at data, is then it prompts you to maybe have a follow-up question, and maybe you want to collect more data about that follow-up question, or maybe it's something that you just decide to test.
Or maybe it's something that you go out and talk to people about to get the color behind it. And this is
Hmm.
where that combination of quantitative data and qualitative data can really make a big impact. Having that, the conversations about, well, what do you think this means? What do you think that means? How does that impact what we do? Those conversations, that collaboration is really where you come with the good insights.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you called the qualitative and quantitative out because I do think it's possible sometimes for organizations to focus too much on one or the other, and they really work best when in my experience when you're doing a little of both and you're looking at what each one can tell you about the other.
Interestingly, when we do strategic planning or other change initiatives, we often start with the survey. Well, we'll do a few interviews just so that we know what questions to ask in the survey and where to hone in. Then we'll do a broad based survey, but I like to do the focus groups after the survey because it enables us to take the information from the survey, get some good quantitative data, have those sort of moments where we're really thinking about what is it that's going on here, and then be able to take that back out to the community and have them really tell us what it means and dig in a little bit deeper.
Yeah, that community call out, and obviously I work for Higher Logic, so the community call out just stuck with me too because I think that's such a great way to you have maybe the focus groups which are a little more like formal or timed or where you have a specific group of people, but I think you can also take sometimes what you learn from data, maybe your membership services survey or what have you, and if you have follow-up questions, like ask them in your online community. That's a captive group of members that hopefully some of them are really active or really willing to share their feedback, and they're in that community, and they might spark a discussion. Like they might a answer the question and give you some perspectives on that, and b them answering the question might lead to other people responding to what they said and saying, actually, yes, I feel that too, or no, I have a different problem and it's this. And then you get that really rich store. I almost think of it as like story data, like the story behind the data, because you have this space where you can really get a little deeper into what does this mean for people.
Yes, and it enables you to get some examples that you can share to make the data come alive for those people who maybe aren't as close to it. So when you're sharing it with others in the organization, be that your board of directors or volunteers, committee leads, or even other staff members, it's really helpful to have those stories that you can share that demonstrate the data. And it also works the other way around. So you can use the community, whether that's focus groups in a more formal sense or the community in a higher logic sense, that online community, to help you figure out what the right questions are at the beginning or to identify some new ideas that you can then test through the survey. So one of the things I think that's really nice about the online community and tapping that for research and data and insights is that it's always on.
Mm-hmm.
You can always go there and get it. When we're doing research for a project, we're oftentimes doing that episodically, where we're doing it at a point in time, whereas the community gives you that real time feedback on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, that just reminded me, and I imagine I think I have a question about this for later, but I'll touch on it now just briefly. That reminded me too that sometimes the always on nature of community is so helpful because people are answering questions you didn't even think to ask. Like you just by going into the community and maybe like looking at what threads are popping up, you're seeing like what do people care about without having to ask them what's most important to you. You can go into an online community and see, oh, these 6 things keep showing up. That tells me that those are important to the members right now. Or people maybe trying to see, like, oh, if you have a young professionals group, is there things they're interacting more with or less with that then going back to the example of like, oh, if you have young professionals, you have data around how many of them you have. If you know they're a big cohort of your membership and you want to make sure they're more engaged, you could look at what they're doing or what they're not doing. Like I know for me, a lot of the data I like looking at is really listening campaign type things where it's just tracking like what are people doing. Sometimes you're asking them a direct question and sometimes you're just taking a look at what are people doing when they aren't being asked a direct question.
I think that the community can also be an early warning signal or an early opportunity signal, if you will, because to your point, they're talking about whatever's top of mind for them at that given point. And we might not even be thinking about it yet, or it might have been something that we thought about and then dismissed. And now we're coming back to it, or we should be coming back to it. And the community is letting us know that this is becoming top of mind again. Or also, I think the community is really an interesting place to get nuanced ideas, something where we're thinking about doing it one way, but they're talking about it differently.
I like that a lot because it leads into like one of the questions I had for you was about how when people are trying to get a sense of member needs, communities can end up being kind of a area where you get that voice of the member or the customer. And what you just said resonated with me a lot because my former association, one of the things we ran into in seeing discussions in our community was that one of the terms that we use to describe a particular type of work was not what they were using. They weren't calling it that. And granted, we used that term from like a very aspirational sense. It was the term that we felt better described what the actual work did. So it came from a place of like our mission, our values, and that was why we used that term. But if you're looking at things from like, for example, member acquisition, I'm a content marketer. I'm always thinking about what are people actually searching online so that when we have content out there, they can find us. If you're talking about member acquisition and you're not using the same words that your members are using to describe certain things, you're not showing up in search for them then. Like if they look up, how do I do XYZ in my field, and you're calling it something totally different and you don't know what they're calling it, then your articles and things, your resources aren't going to show up for them. And then you're going to limit your access to potential people who aren't members yet, who are just looking that stuff up on their own without realizing you exist.
This is one of my pet peeves when I was in marketing and doing marketing communications, is that we would always come up with these fancy ways of saying something, or these really cute and interesting monikers for something, which is great. I mean, it was fun and it was catchy, but people didn't know what we were talking about. And if they didn't know what we were talking about, it wasn't something they needed. And in fact, I was brought back to that just last year. I did an online training program for facilitating strategy and strategy conversations for people in-house who are having to do that on a regular basis. And I called it a strategy facilitation session. And interestingly, when using all of the tools that are available now, right, with AI and some of the other online marketing tools, they kept trying to get me to call it something different, to be a little bit more catchy with the name. And I think it's a fine line, but definitely being able to use some language that resonates for your members and for the folks that you're trying to reach is critical. For me, there was in this particular case, this balance between calling it strategy facilitation and saying, this is how to get your board to get aligned, right? Or this is how to get your team to get aligned, because people are much more interested in that than necessarily learning how to do facilitation. So facilitation is my technical term, but getting aligned is really part of the deal. That's the why. And I think you can really hear that why when you're communicating with your members on a regular basis.
I love that example. It's also a pet peeve of mine. Usually, the pet peeve surfaces with regard to like webinar or conference session titles when people are trying, and it probably comes from actually further back. I was an English major, and I feel like sometimes titles of like research papers or dissertations or whatever are trying so hard to be cutesy that you're like, what is this about? Why would I read this? What is it about? Same thing with like webinars, same thing with conference titles. I'm like, just tell me what I'm going to learn if I come do this webinar. I wonder if you have any tips for, like, I think there's definitely people who know, yes, I can go to the community, people on any team where they know, yes, I can go to the community to get these insights. But I wonder if you have any tips for kind of elevating the role of community internally, like making sure that like people across the organization know that they can go there for the voice of the member, for what people are talking about.
And I think that this is a real opportunity in associations and personally for that community manager. The community manager holds a lot of information, and they're reading in there, they're in touch with the members, even if they're just taking the information in and not posting into the community. But I don't know how far it goes. I think oftentimes the nuance of that, the interesting tidbits, there's not always an easy forum for sharing that. And yet it's so valuable. And I think sometimes the community manager can get a little bit sidelined, as that's just that, stay in your lane, do your community management, manage the team. But I think if you can reframe your role as owning the voice of the customer, of owning the voice of the member, it can really be elevating for a career. I can tell you, when I was in the corporate world, I remember that I sat on an executive team for a $200 million division of a company. And so we would meet every couple of weeks, and it was a lot of senior folks in the team. And we would be bringing forward ideas as a marketing team, like these are some things that we want to do. And our ideas would either get upvoted or downvoted very quickly by the VP of sales. And it was always because he would say, well, that's not what our customers are telling us. That's not what we're hearing from our customers. Right. And so he had this sort of outsized vote in the team because he owned that voice of the customer. So what we did is we actually went out. These were the days where everyone wasn't necessarily online, but we created a customer advisory board and started bringing in a customer advisory board on a regular basis. And now we actually also owned the voice of the customer in that room, and were able to credibly call that forward. And it was a game changer in terms of us being able to really understand, or to be able to influence what was happening in that room. And I think it could be the same for a community manager. To elevate their ability to bring forward the voice of the customer elevates their voice within those decision-making rooms.
I love that example. I'm sure there are listeners who've run into similar things where they're like, I know we should be doing XYZ thing, but I'm just not getting the buy in to do it. And it just reminds me how, like, a little earlier in the episode, you mentioned, like, when you are trying to get buy in for things, try to point out what the members want. Something we talk about a lot internally is how important personalization is, and how it's really hard to get people to adopt the strategies that lead to that segmentation, that personalization, because it does involve, if an organization's not doing it yet, it involves a little bit of a upfront investment to be like, yes, we have the data we need to segment these lists, and we know what that data is, and we know how we want to segment it. Like, that's not always easy to get started, and sometimes you need buy-in from leadership to set aside the time to do that really important work, so that you can actually lean on your data to drive. I mean, not at that point, it's not just insights, it's actually the framework on which you're building a strategy, that you're saying, okay, if people have these features, that means they're in this group, and we're sending them this personalized information. And I know, for me personally, it was hard to get investment from leadership to do that work, because they were like, no, we have fine enough open rates or click rates for these emails, or we get good enough attendance for this. And it was pointing out over time, like, the more that we keep not personalizing, the more our members feel like we don't know them at all, and the less likely they're going to give us money. So you're saying, oh, our registration rates are fine, our email rates are fine, but you're also saying, we're not getting as many renewals, we're not retaining members. Why can't we retain members? And it was like, okay, well, if we talk to them, a lot of them are saying, oh, I just get the same, like, blasted email everybody else does, and at this point it's just annoying in my inbox. I don't want it anymore. I'm not going to renew my membership because I don't see. Or, like, a lot of times some of them would say, I don't think the organization, I think they were good for me when I started, and now I don't think they have any resources for me. And that wasn't true. We had resources that were for, like, people further along in their careers, but we weren't targeting and saying, oh, your early career, here's what you might want to learn. Oh, you're further along, or you've done these courses already, here's the next step. And so they were feeling like, oh, I think I used it up. I think I got what I could out of the membership, and I'm going to leave now. And then it would be only once they left and we're sending, like, re-engagement campaigns, like, no, please come back. We promise we have something.
Well, it's funny. There's so much there that I want to unpack. There's like three different topics in what you were just talking about. One of them is engagement and using personalization to get engagement. And as a strategist, I can tell you that in so many of the strategic conversations that we're having right now with associations, engagement is one of their number one concerns, because they've made this connection in their minds between engagement and renewal. Value proposition is the other piece. So combine engagement, which is interacting on a regular basis, and then value proposition, which is, am I getting out of it what I want to get out of it? Is it worth my time, energy, and effort of engaging? Am I getting enough out of it that's helping me to meet my goals? And those two things are really top of mind for associations right now. So thinking about how can you use this information to be more targeted, to present to members what they want when they want it, to understand what is their path, where are they headed, what's their next step in their career, and how do you get them there, or in their personal lives as people start to get older in their careers, they tend not to need the same things, right? Early in a career, you're looking for education and knowledge. Middle career, you're tending to look for more connection points and shared understanding and understanding from peers. At a senior level, you're tending to want to give back more and yet to still stay abreast of what's changing in the marketplace and what's shifting. So being able to talk to all of those people at the time where they feel that they are moving from one step to the other, or where they are feeling like they need to build in a particular area, is so critical. And then building from there, we get to the difficulties that you were mentioning about actually delivering that kind of content. As a marketer, when I was doing marketing, we would have marketing automation systems, and we had the capability of doing that type of targeted marketing, not quite the same way we do today. And I can come back to that in a minute. We can maybe spend a little time talking about AI, but we had the capability to send out those kinds of targeted messages through marketing automation. But what we didn't have was the capacity to create the content, to create the customized content, because while the system could send it out and it could tag people as being in a particular segment and it could send out content accordingly, what it couldn't do was help us build the content. And I think that that's been one of the biggest barriers to being able to realize that promise of customization and segmentation within the association world.
I know for our listeners, you couldn't see me vigorously nodding, but there are things Stephanie was saying where I was like, when you were like, oh, we just didn't have the capacity. We knew we could automate. We knew we could segment, but we didn't have the capacity to do it. Like 100,000%. I'm sure we have listeners. I know from my experience that sometimes that's the most frustrating thing, knowing that you could do it, that you should do it, but you can't make it happen. And I'm going to take you up on leading us into that conversation about AI and some of the ways that that's maybe changing that a little bit, or ways that it's useful in this context.
Yeah, that's what makes me so excited about this future and the future of leveraging AI, is that we can maybe hopefully finally cash in on the promise of engagement and personalization that we've known has been sitting out there for so long. And other organizations, really big organizations, have been able to do it. The consumer products organizations, but they're deeply funded and deeply resourced, and they have a lot more staff. And as associations, that's always a challenge for us. There's also the piece about volunteers and having a lot of the work that we do either flow through volunteers or be done by volunteers. But let's set that aside for the moment and talk about AI, because I think it is a real game changer, could be a real game changer for us. AI has the capacity to customize, probably for at the level of an individual. I'm not sure if we're quite ready for that yet, but it's possible. But also the idea of being able to take transactional information and behavioral information and combine them together in order to create engagement is really powerful, because what we know about what people do is different perhaps than what they would like to do or what would be most helpful for them. And so being able to marry that data together in order to create that engagement, that content of one, if you will, could be really, really powerful. I don't know about you, but I've been experimenting with AI a lot lately, just in different workflows and different things. And it's pretty incredible what's possible. And I was shameless plug, I guess, for Higher Logic, is that I was at the Higher Logic UserCon a couple of weeks ago, and super excited about what Higher Logic is doing in terms of building the AI into the systems that you have.
Superforum is always awesome, our annual conference. And I know Rob talked about some of the stuff that's coming to the product. That's all really exciting, because I mean, our goal, as you know, is to make sure that the way we build the product is really supporting the folks that use it and makes it easier to just hopefully you don't have to like learn how to do this whole new thing with AI. You can just like use what's built in it to the extent that we can build things in. Do you have any like examples of things that you've been really successful with AI, kind of that marrying the data that you were talking about? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Always hard to think of examples right in the moment, but we have been doing a lot of data analysis using AI, and the idea of being able to look at what we heard and then bring in what's happening in the marketplace and sort of put those into the same conversation has been really powerful. Another thing, actually, I do have an example for you. We did one of our clients did some user conversations, some conversations with some previous clients. They documented those in recording and in transcription. We took their transcriptions and fed them through a custom and closed system to, with their permission, just to be clear, into a closed system, and we're able to get out for them actually a mind map that helped them think about the themes. They had gone through and manually figured out some of the themes, but what we were able to do is to use AI and create a mind map for them that had its own themes, but very, very closely aligned to what we had done from a manual perspective. But then it spidered out into the details, right? And so we would have never had the time to spider that out into all of that level of detail just from those interviews. So it's an example of us being able to take and look at the long tail and not just the themes. This kind of goes back to our data conversation earlier about the difference between data and insights. Oftentimes, I find that the data is the center of the mind map, if you will, but the insights happen at the outer edges. And so being able to take that and parse it out in that way allowed us to circle certain things that were insightful that we may have missed had it not been called out in quite the same way.
Yeah, I really like that example because it makes me think about many of the ways that I have been experimenting with AI have been around taking something that we did and building on it. So, like, one of the exciting things for me, I work on Higher Logic's annual reports, and we look at de identified data to see if there's like trends in email or community behavior for associations and their members. So, like, are there trends happening? Pulling that data used to take a really long time because it involved a lot of like people coordinating to be like, what data do we want? How do we pull it? Did it come out of the server right? And now then you had to take that data and build graphs from it to actually kind of visualize what you were looking at, because you would just get the raw data, and it's like thousands of customers, millions and millions of emails they're sending, and all like, again, you want to de-identify it, but you also want to be able to tell like, oh, is this a bigger organization, is this a smaller organization? So all of that used to take a really long time, and we're shifting into maybe being able to get that base level faster, and that means more room to maybe look at it more often and see trends on a quicker time frame, to not be like, oh, we can only do this once a year because it's such a heavy investment. It's okay, maybe we can look at this more often. And then the other part of it is, because that first layer is done or is just like built in, there's the possibility to build off of that and say, well, what are the questions we never had time to ask before? Can we ask other questions? Can we dig deeper? Like you said, that spidering out of like, we learned this, but what does that make us want to learn next? Does it open up a little time to dig a little deeper?
You probably have done a lot of research in your lifetime, and I've done it as well. And there's always another question,
Mm-hmm.
right? We have a report, but even with the report, there's still always another question that we want to ask, or another piece, or another, dig a little deeper, and that ability to go a little deeper is so valuable, I think. I'll give you another quick example of where I wish I would have had the AI that we have now. This was a few years ago, and we did a survey for a client. It was a community survey of their physical community, so for a city, and actually for their library. And we had 3,000 responses to our survey. We were thrilled to have a good turnout for this survey. As we dug into it, we realized that some of those were not legitimate responses, because as we looked at the Excel sheet, you could see that the same paragraph long open-ended response was in multiple places. And it turns out we did some more digging and realized that we had been hacked. An agent had gone in and answered the questionnaire. And so it turned out that out of the 3,000, 1,000 of those were bogus records. Well, I had to do all of that sleuthing myself, right, individually going through line by line 3,000 records to figure out were there duplicates. And so there were two ways we knew there were duplicates, or the zip code wasn't in their service area. Well, had we been able to use AI at that point, that probably would have taken seconds or minutes, and it took days. And so, the possibilities that AI opens up are just incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes back to what you said about like even like transcripts and stuff too. If you're an organization that has like regular member conversations, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. Like I know in the corporate world, like our organization, we have customer service people who are regularly talking to our customers. And if we have transcripts from those, we can kind of get a sense of like, are there regular things people are getting stuck on much more easily now? And that is another thing to kind of look at. Are there regular things that people are getting stuck on, or that are making them dislike the product, or if you're an association, making them not value their membership? Those things, AI makes it a lot easier to surface them more quickly than, like, for example, needing to go back through like a bunch of transcripts or just hope someone remembers it and surfaces it. Like, I feel like that's actually what was happening. It would be like, oh, hopefully the customer service team or the membership team or whoever it is that's talking to people, hopefully they will tell the rest of us if there's a problem. And often they do, but they're not going to just like remember everything. So sometimes it's nice that you can kind of aggregate and have a little report maybe on a regular basis that says, hey, these are the top 5 questions that keep coming up in the community. Questions about membership versus questions about the work that they do where they might want some education.
And oftentimes those things surface over time. So even if you have a person looking at it and reading it regularly, they may not pick up on that pattern because it happens over a course of a few months.
Mm-hmm.
You need a special mind to be really picking up on some of those, like the big themes, sure. But I think, going back to the conversation we were having about what I'll call the long tail, oftentimes the things in those peripheries, in those spidered out sections, that's where the real innovation happens. That's where the new ideas come forward. We can talk about themes and the things that everyone is thinking about, but when we think about innovation and ideation and non-dues revenue and thinking about new ways to serve our members, oftentimes the spark of those ideas comes from the long tail. It comes from those things that just pop up, or that when you read them, it makes you go, huh, tell me more. And then to be able to use a system or an AI to say, has anybody else talked about anything related to this in the last 6 months or the last year? That's where AI is really going to help us, is in innovation, is in those long tail ideas.
Yeah, I mean, that leads so well into like one of the other questions I had for you, which was literally about if we're talking about innovation or and co-creation, like how associations use their communities not just to gather feedback, but to actively like shape and test new ideas. I feel like you just sort of naturally went right into that.
Yeah, well, and part of that testing of new ideas is to be able to go in with something that isn't fully baked. Oftentimes, we don't want to go out into the market as a large organization. We don't want to go into the marketplace with something that's not complete. We want to be able to do a big splash and do a launch and show things. I think we've moved away from that a little bit as a society in general, but also your community, those are the people that are really invested in your product, in your organization, in what you offer, and they care. And being able to take something to them that's a spark of an idea or the question of idea, and helping them to help you shape it can be really helpful at every stage of development. There's that early ideation and starting to say, what could this look like? What might it look like? Should it be a podcast episode, or should it be a white paper, or should it be a micro learning opportunity, or should it be a full-on conference program or a pre-conference program? Helping to understand the level, the depth, the areas of interest, how deep does this go, what are the components of it, can be really helpful at the early stages. And then at the middle stages, maybe doing a pilot with some of the folks in your community. Again, they're invested. They probably, if they're visiting your community regularly, they care, they want to learn, they want to be a part of it. And so taking advantage of that in order to help build something that will then resonate for them and help them do what they want to get done. And then at the end stages, maybe they become the test case. They are the pilot, and then they become your advocates and provide the references and the case studies and things like that for when you do go out and market it more broadly.
Yeah, I love that example for so many reasons. I mean, I love the option to be able to test something before having to fully launch it because it takes a lot of investment from an organization to launch something, to start advertising it, to try to get people to buy in. And you're going to feel a lot more confident about that if you've had the opportunity to run it through. I mean, Higher Logic obviously believes that we do beta stuff for our features for the community for that exact reason, to make sure that it's working, to make sure that people like it, to see if they have feedback so that we're not creating in a bubble. The other thing that was occurring to me when you were describing it that I like about this is I have noticed a shift in. I do see it a lot in younger professionals, but it's not just younger professionals. It's like a shift in the way that people like opportunities to contribute or to shape things. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily like if it's happening naturally or if it's driven a little bit by our kind of social media culture of people having these opportunities more often to interact with brands or interact with people that they follow. But I notice more often this appetite from people to be able to say, yeah, I want this in this is a silly example, but like I want this in orange versus I want this in blue. It's not just that they're guiding you on a way that will work better. They are also getting some engagement out of answering your question. They're getting to feel like I helped shape this. I helped make it. This organization cares about what I think and cares about how I want to interact with them, and they're asking me and they're giving me opportunities to weigh in. It does matter what you ask them, but to an extent, it almost doesn't matter always exactly what you ask them. You don't have to get it perfect. Just the fact that you are asking them is giving them an opportunity to get connected with you, to feel more like, again, this organization cares about me and I helped shape what this looks like.
I facilitate some customer advisory boards and councils for various organizations. And that is invariably the feedback that we get. People, of course, enjoy the time together. They enjoy working with their peers and spending time with their peers. And they frankly just like giving back. They like that their opinion matters to someone. They
Yep.
like that their expertise is not just sitting inside them, but it's actually coming forward and being used to help shape something for other people. There's an intrinsic value in that that people really get excited about.
Associations often struggle to distinguish signal from noise. So I wonder, Stephanie, how you recommend organizations evaluate signals coming from their communities and from member conversations.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, Kelly, because I think the conventional wisdom is you should only listen to those things where you're hearing momentum, where there's a lot of people that are kind of jumping on the bandwagon and saying the same thing and looking for those intersections of conversation. And that's true. I mean, those are the things that a lot of people are thinking about. But as a futurist, I'm also thinking about what's the next thing, the thing that most people aren't talking about quite yet. And you very seldom find that in the cacophony of people adding to whatever conversation is happening. You often find the signals for what's next in the people that are saying something completely different, the contrarians, if you will. While, yes, listen to the group, I think it's really important also to listen to those voices that are saying something that's very, very different. And oftentimes, it's not a complaint so much as it is an observation, perhaps. This is where it gets tricky to discern signal from noise because it's really easy. You can't just take every single one of those things and take it as the way that we should move forward. So it requires a little bit of personal discernment. You have to apply your own experience to what you're hearing. And what we say in future thinking is that if you see something that looks unique and it makes you go, huh, that's different. I wonder if, right? I wonder if we did that. I wonder what that means. I wonder what would happen if we amplified that conversation. And oftentimes, those are the things that have real traction for the future and not just the present.
Certainly, there is a bit of work when you're in an association of taking a look at how many how many voices is this really? Like when you're looking at something like someone complaining about, oh, I didn't like that this conference session was in rounds or something, then you might ask yourself, okay, well, how many of our sessions really are in rounds? How many people actually complained versus how many people were there? So there's certainly some statistics or pieces of feedback where you are taking into account how many voices are being raised about it. But I really like what you positioned there about having the discernment to choose those things that do come up, especially I think in communities where it might give you an opportunity to test something. And that's one other thing while you were talking that I felt like could be worth calling out for listeners is not every idea you hear or not every idea you come up with based on feedback from your members has to be a success. Like sometimes you're going to hear something and it's going to make you ask that question, like you said, Stephanie, of what if we do this? And if you do that, a couple times and some of them don't work out, that doesn't mean don't do it anymore. It kind of means approach things from a testing mindset of saying, okay, what if we do this and how might we test it so that we can see, yes, this is going to get some pickup. This is something that our members are going to pick up and run with. Because I feel like that is very much the key to not just sticking with the way that you've always done things. And that's the key to moving into a mindset and a approach where your membership and your member benefits and the value you bring as an association keeps up with the speed of the way things change in your industry.
And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, the idea of being able to test some of these ideas, to use this community of insiders to be able to help you try things out, or whether that's in concept or in practice. How can you leverage the knowledge of the team? There's always ways to leverage the knowledge of the community in order to help you test some of these ideas. And tying that back into what we were saying with those individual voices, totally agree with you. Sometimes the one person who is really, really angry that the temperature was too cold, you just have to ignore them, right? We've all been there. But it's those other ones. It's the ones that have something, they see something that someone else doesn't, right? Or they pick up on something that's an undercurrent and put words to it. Those are the things probably to pay more attention to. Then as a community leader, you can perhaps amplify some of those conversations or amplify some of those comments and ask questions about it. Oh, wow, Frank just said this. Does anyone else see that? What do you see in this area? And sort of open up that conversation in a way that maybe wouldn't have happened otherwise. I think there's a great opportunity there as well.
It goes back to something too I was just talking about with our CEO, Rob Wenger, about AI is going to amplify certain things that you do, but there's always that human discussion portion is so valuable still, and in my opinion always, because that is that intersection of people with different perspectives discussing something, or people experiencing a similar industry discussing something, is always going to raise certain like good ideas to the top, I feel like. So I love that you showed that there's a way to take something, maybe one comment one person says, and turn it into a conversation that gives you even more insight and data.
Yeah, exactly.
For associations that want to become maybe more insight driven, they want to use their communities this way, or just be using their data better, but they're feeling overwhelmed about where to begin. What's a practical first step you might recommend taking this year?
I'd love to see the community manager take on the role of pulling out information from the community and disseminating it within the organization. It doesn't have to be anything super formal or big. I think, in fact, it might be better if it's not. It might be better if it's a weekly, monthly, quarterly, depending on your traffic flow and how much conversation is happening in your communities. But pulling out some of these interesting ideas, those one-off comments for testing, what the group is saying in a more collective way, things that might be helpful from a language perspective. We talked about that earlier, right? Picking up the way that your community talks about a particular thing, putting those in an email or a one-page newsletter, but keep it super short. I mean, a 5-minute max read, more like a 30-second to 1.5-minute read would be even better, so that people will read it and not just put it aside to read later. And maybe even calling out, hey, for marketing, this was something, an interesting way that someone talked about something that really seemed to grab traction. Or, hey, for product development, here's something that you might be thinking about, or that our members are thinking about, or here's a challenge they're having that we might want to ideate around. So I think as a community manager, this also goes back to the conversation about amplifying your voice and your role, putting these things in front of people more effectively in a quick, easy to read way that doesn't make them have to go in and search for things and pull it all out themselves, makes you more valuable, makes the community more valuable, and brings those insights to the table for the rest of the organization in a really easy to use, interactive way.
You hit the nail on the head. As you were describing it, you started tying it back to stuff that we talked about, because that was occurring to me as you were saying it too. It was like, wow, such a straightforward thing you could do that is already hitting some of those things we talked about throughout the episode of elevating the community, getting it at the forefront of people's minds that it is this source of information, and such a simple application to start doing. Then you're getting more value out of your community investment as well, because you are regularly looking at it. I mean, that occurs to me with every platform that I use. I'm always like, oh, I really should log into this a little more and get my insights on the day to day. So I love that suggestion. That's great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today, Stephanie. I think you've covered a lot of really helpful thought starters for people, or just ways that they can dig a little deeper into the value they're getting out of their community, and the ways that they're using member discussions, member data to be a little bit more insight driven, and make decisions that are based on what members are looking for.
Well, thank you. Thank you again so much for having me, Kelly. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to continue to work together.
Thanks for joining us on the Member Engagement Show. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and check out past guests and resources at higherlogic.com/engagement show. I'm Kelly Whelan, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of the Member Engagement Show.